First of all, sir, we don't want to presume anything. What's happening in Mindanao, do you take that separately, or is there in fact a larger context here?
Well, Rido, as you mentioned, which means clan war, which could be caused by many factors, actually is intertwined with what has become as the Moro Rebellion. In times where there is an intensification of war, say, between the government forces and Moro fronts, usually the Rido would be, say, hidden for a time. But at the times that peace would reign, that is when there will be some kind of peace agreement or an arrangement where Moro fronts would forge a peace process with the government, and there will be some kind of lull in war between government forces and Moro fronts. Usually Rido would surface. So that is to say that Rido has been there actually for a very long time, because the assumption is that there are forces on the ground that had been there. For instance, the presence of big political families, their access to firearms, then issues like land problems, issues like election-related violence, conflicting claims on certain economic opportunities, and many, many others could be reasons for the occurrence of Rido. And oftentimes, even there will be instances of resolutions, say among clans or families. It would not take long before another round of of skirmishes among families would happen. So the point we're raising is, even if to a certain degree there has been lull of skirmishes and conflict between government forces and rebel fronts, the Rido problem has remained in the south, particularly in Muslim Mindanao. You have earlier identified some instances of big families involved in Rido due to election-related problems, like the Ampatuans and the Magudadato. That's just one of the many instances.
Yes, sir.
Because practically from Lanao to Maguindanao to part of Zamboanga, Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi, there had been Rido of many kinds in these places. Except that what sort of make us curious, Robbie, is that why is it that supposedly the presence of the BARMM would somehow bring peace to the area and address, would be able to address Rido or instances of possibilities of clan war or conflict amongst families. But we have seen rather the occurrence of many instances of violence in Maguindanao, in Cotabato, in Basilan, except for a time, Sulu and Tawi-Tawi.
But Professor, Professor, that's precisely what I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that in times of intense or intensification of some factor or some force or trend or phenomenon in the region that instigates, that can reignite Rido. But right now, what's the context for that? As you said, if we talk about BARMM, it is you would presume that this is headed towards a new era that will inspire peace, as well as probably still instigate some selfish, some self-interest. In the meantime, elections in the rest of the country is 2 years away. So what if anything,
Right.
might be the main context that's triggering Rido right now, if this were in fact Rido.
That is in fact our question, Robbie. Why is it that with the establishment of the BARMM, with the fact that some kind of arrangement, peaceful arrangement has been put in place, yet there is a resurgence of violence and what you refer to as Rido in many areas? We could only assume, and we are not necessarily speculating on the case of the, attempt assassinations on Governor Adjong. But we are just making some assumption in terms of the fact that perhaps of the new arrangement that is the presence of the BARMM and the entry of the MILF through the decommissioning into the fold of the law, some kind of a restructuring of forces, if you may, in both the urban and rural areas, where, say, families with Rido that were not resolved may have been affected because of this rearrangement. Say, for instance, when some members of the MILF had to, lay down their firearms, therefore making the security in this period, in this time, quite distinct from the past. So somehow, the balance of forces, in a sense, say, among families had been affected.
Okay.
In the past, Robbie, usually there are what you call balance of powers among feuding families. So that Rido are actually, in a sense, part and parcel of the balancing of power amongst political families. In the case of Lanao del Sur, I think the fact that relatively there are, in a sense, less contending families, as influential as, say, the Adjong, the Alontos, the Maporos, and others. So we are at loss of explaining who are those who did that assassination attempt, on Governor Adjong.
Sir, do you
While
think this
in
is
other places,
just a struggle for power left after the organization of BARMM, or can it also be rooted in poverty and the lack of development and also social norms?
Well, if poverty is a factor, Gretchen, poverty has been there. And, say if you are poor and you know that the one you will be engaged against would be that a big family, you won't just make such as an attempt. You will not make such an attempt. So in that case, poverty would not necessarily be translated into a Rido, especially if there is a kind of a relationship of asymmetrical relationship that is big family with small family.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that it's not a factor, but it is less of a possibility that a poverty could be a cause of Rido. Because,
sige po.
Rido is a continuing, recurring problem.
Opo.
So it would be usually big families who are engaged in Rido contending each other.
Okay,
And they are
Professor.
not necessarily poor.